This is
Make It Plain.
Make It Plain.
MIP
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make It Plain.
Get woke.
Whenever we can, we're glad to have our friend Eric Boehlert with us. Press Run, fearless media commentary. Be sure to subscribe at Pressrun.media if you've not already. Hey, buddy, how are you?
Hey, good to hear you, I should say.
Yeah, good to be heard.
Yeah.
You've kind of been focusing on employment and jobs, and your latest, of course, deals with anti-vaxxers and them quitting their jobs. The media, as you and I always discuss, they fixate on things that are sometimes so off the beaten path and elevate things that should not be elevated. Tell us about that and what that's really all about, and this whole focus on folks quitting who are vaxxers.
Yeah. So the headline I used was, "Who cares if anti-vaxxers quit their jobs?" And the answer is the media. The media is completely obsessed with this idea. In New York City, there were, I think it was cops yesterday walking across the Brooklyn Bridge to protest. They're not going to adhere to the city's vaccine mandate. And obviously Biden put in a vaccine mandate for companies with 100 and larger than employees. And these mandates are incredibly successful. I think it's United Airlines, 99% of employees have complied. For the New York City, the Board of Education, it's 96, 97%, 99% of principals, 98% of teachers. Mandates work. They make sense. And they make people do things that they might have not already done because they're looking at quitting their job. Anyway, so there's this, as always, this very loud, very small, in this case, minority, the 1-2%ers who are loudly standing up and are actually quitting their job, and they're talking about tyranny, and you can't live in a free country if you're gonna, if the government's gonna make you get a shot, even though every one of these people's kids had to have a measles and mumps shots to go to kindergarten. And the press is just fascinated, and the coverage is wrong, and as I point out, for so many ways. A lot of it is kind of this hand-holding coverage and almost presenting these people as being heroic. The New York Times. What's that?
No, I was just saying I agree.
Yeah. So the New York Times over the weekend, did a big front page piece, and they talked about how, the resistance is unwavering. And instead of basically questioning these people's mental health on why any grown man or woman, unless you have deep, religious reservations or something like that, why any grown man or woman would walk away from a good paying job, and in many of these cases, good paying jobs with benefits and pensions, put your family at financial risk. Because, where are you going to turn around and get another job if you refuse to get a vaccine? You're obviously limiting your job options because you won't take a free, safe, and effective vaccine. The coverage should be asking about brainwashing. It should be asking about, mental health and things like that. But instead, like I said, they're portrayed as kind of these heroic people standing up for their principles when the principles don't make any sense. Also, the coverage allows people to just spread misinformation and disinformation and propaganda. So if you're going to do these big stories, New York Times did a 2,000-word story, the Wall Street Journal over the weekend, a 2,000-word story. A lot of it is going to be asking these people why they refuse to get this very simple shot. Oh, I don't trust the government. We don't have enough research. And a lot of the coverage doesn't point out the fact that these are all lies. And, 200 million people have taken the shot safely and things like that. And really the big problem is this is kind of both sides journalism taken to an absolute extreme measures. You have this 1 or 2% who's being portrayed as being just as newsworthy and as important as the 98% of the employees who are taking the shot. And it's always this basis. And to me, and the last point is it's just the continued media normalization of mostly Trump supporters and their irrational and nihilistic behavior Nothing they do will ever be portrayed as unthinking and dangerous and bizarre. It's always couched in these terms. Again, you look and watch this coverage, you would think these were just common sense, thoughtful folk who just had a slightly different take on things.
Yeah.
And that is not at all what's going on.
Well, but it goes, I put it in the same line as what you've always reminded us of before and continuously remind us of. This focus, as you said, on the 2%. Now, you mentioned all these jurisdictions where the majority of people have been vaccinated.
Yeah.
When Republicans lose and lose badly, the mainstream media wants to talk to those who lose.
Yeah.
If Democrats lose an election, they don't interview Democrats who lost or Democratic voters whose candidate didn't win. It's just this need to elevate the losers, those who are on the losing side. And now I'm beginning to wonder. I was with Barber this weekend in West Virginia. We were talking about the filibuster. Yeah. I'm beginning to wonder, because that is a minority type of thing. It's like whoever is on the losing side, in the minority, the minuscule amount, small number of people that can literally 10 Republican senators can stop anything.
Yeah.
Right. Or less. It's like, well, that's who we're going to highlight. We're going to lift those. We're not going to do a story on. Let's do a story on why the vast majority of many of these government workers have been vaccinated. What made them decide to do it? Or hell, interview two of them at the same time. One who doesn't want to do it and one who did. Just kind of get a double perspective. But no, we're just going to lift up. We're just going to lift up those and celebrate it and really enable the whole insurrectionist mentality. This is just, they're standing up, they're strong. But those of us who stand up for other things that are real need to be stood up for, like voting rights.
Yep.
Do stories on that. I'm sorry.
And to me, there are two types of stories that could be done that would be interesting that I don't see anywhere. One is a lot of people are going to get new jobs because all these cops and firefighter and nurses quit. Why don't you do a story on that? On the all these new job openings. I pointed out in my piece, particularly with cops and firefighters, the only time we've really heard about these jobs in the past is when groups went to court and sued because they so badly wanted the jobs and were being kept out because of issues of race and gender. Right. These have been held up as kind of these privileged jobs, and now people are just walking away from them because they won't get a shot. I'd like to see a story about all the new people who are going to get great jobs because these people have gone down the rabbit hole and embraced information. I'd also love to see a story about spouses and husbands and wives whose partners are walking away from good paying jobs with benefits and pensions and putting their families at financial risk. Right. What's that like when your husband says, "Oh, I'm quitting"? What do you mean you're quitting? "Oh, I'm not going to take a shot." What do you mean you're not going to? Where are you going to work? "Oh, I don't know. Maybe I'll mow lawns or something." "Oh, we have a kid in college." To me, that's a fascinating dynamic, and we haven't really seen any. These people and they're embracing conspiracy, and the government is trying to make them sick with a vaccine. The ripple effect on a personal level, on a family level, is going to create so much chaos. And I feel, imagine being a sixth or seventh grader knowing your dad's quitting his job because he won't get a shot, and what that's going to mean to your future. And you've lived through COVID for 2 years and your life is just all about uncertainty. And now your parents, adults who should know better, are making these bizarre life choices and putting everyone's life not at risk necessarily, but in jeopardy and taking away a normalcy and things like that. I don't see any coverage about that. I just see, these people are standing up for their principles. And again, I put this example in my piece. If there was a kind of an unhinged far left movement where men and women were quitting their jobs because they were forced to wear shoes and shirts to work, would those people get sympathetic coverage, or would their mental health be rightfully questioned? Because it doesn't make any sense. But that's certainly not the kind of coverage we're seeing. And you're right. Traditionally, in the past, when Democratic candidates lost, that was it. They were in the dustbin of history. When Michael Dukakis lost, when John Kerry lost, we didn't see coverage 9 months later about John Kerry supporters. but we are absolutely, Washington Post in the last 48 hours, big piece about Trump supporters. Reporter went to Idaho. Who goes to Idaho to get the pulse of the nation? Well, Trump supporters, we got to interview them for 2,000 words. This has never happened in the history of political journalism, where the losers, where the loud minority is treated as the majority.
More MIP after this message.
Yeah, and on the spouses, man. See, I that's been a thing for me, because we do live in a world where really entertainment has been centered around Real Housewives and all this kind of stuff. I could see coverage, if not reality shows, about spouses who leave crazy wives and husbands who either in the insurrection or who are quitting their jobs now. I mean, I could see that getting in, everybody watching that, because people like that kind of drama anyway. But I'm sure it's the case. I'm quitting my job because I have to get a vaccine. Not for anything. Nothing I find too, Eric. I'll be very honest with you. Some of the people, and some of them are like me, African Americans. Some of the people who don't want to get a vaccine. So here's the deal. I have found the people most vocally active, even if they aren't anti-vaxxers, but they just don't want to take this vaccine with COVID. Let's just, I'm just against it. They're very. I found those tend to be the people who have also never been active on any other social justice issue. It's like this is something I found I can stand up for. I've never stood up for anything. Now, everybody's mad at other people who've been longtime anti-vaxxers, RFK anti-vaxxers, RFK Jr. But I have to be honest, I'm not surprised. It's not a story to me, the people who've always been anti-vaxxers. Okay, so I mean, those who've always been anti-vaxxers on every vaccine, of course, they're not going to be
sure.
COVID-19 vaccine. Okay, so I mean, people get tripped out and said, but no, that's what they've always been. What would you expect them to be? But it's the people who are new, who've never taken a position on anything.
Yep.
Let's have a strike at work for a pay raise. Let's fight to organize a union.
Right.
Let's stand up for this person they're discriminating against at work. I don't want something or anything. But it's like, this is something they feel called. It's just really interesting to me, the things people feel called to do randomly. And to your point, I mean, that's the story. Let's talk to some of these families.
Yeah.
Who because people do have mortgages and car notes and tuition. Is this really something that you want that is worth doing? But now, I did mention you have looked at employment now. On last week, you wrote about how Republicans mispredicted what would happen when it came to workers, and then how they really owe workers an apology. And you also wrote over the weekend about, or you asked the question about where did all the workers go? And again, to me, where are those conversations and interviews when it comes to people who could go back to work, who couldn't go back to? I mean, those are real stories. There's even in the majority. I mean, hell, you can write stories about people who couldn't go back to work because they have long COVID, because they're sick. But the mainstream ones, we want to write about these bullhorn wearing anti-vaxxers. Everybody's wearing a horn with bulls now. I mean, a hat with a horn, bulls, all of that, because I think of the guy who was at the insurrection.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about how you found the Republicans really needing to apologize to the U.S. workers they claimed would be lazy or are lazy.
Yeah, so back in the spring, you remember it became apparent there was a work shortage, and a Republican governor in Montana had the idea, there's a shortage because the government's paying, and the states and governments paying an extra $300 a month because of for COVID unemployment. That was part of the COVID relief bill. And Joe Biden has created this national worker shortage. So I'm going to cut those funds off. Those funds don't cost the state a dime. It was free money that people were getting from the federal government. And then next thing we know, 25 Republican governors all did the same thing. I've heard from the Chamber of Commerce, if we cut off unemployment benefits, everyone will run out their door and rush to apply for jobs once those $300 a month checks stop. And so 25 governors did it. And the problem was the press treated it seriously. The press treated it as a legitimate economic theory, even though economists at the time said this doesn't make any sense. There's no evidence that this is what's happening. We just came out of a once in a century, or basically once in a never national pandemic. There's no simple rules explanation for why people aren't going back to work. So, but the press, amplified it. They said they went with the both sides, approach. Republicans say this is the problem. Economists say it's not. Well, we can't decide, so we're just going to give a platform, as usual, to the loud, angry Republican minority. Well, by now, we have 10 different stacks of studies, and obviously the unemployment information themselves, data itself, proves that the theory was nonsense. We have, all the benefits, either state or local, expired in September. We have more unfilled jobs after those benefit ended. So the theory was a complete joke. And a lot of the coverage early on only talked to employers. I think the press has done a better job in the last couple of months, getting the viewpoint of employees into this debate. But what happened is there's been a national unprecedented shift in cultural and labor shift in terms of what people want to do with their lives and what they want to do with their jobs.
Yeah.
And there's a myriad of reasons why people aren't going back to work. And $300 checks had nothing to do with it. But Republicans and the conservative right-wing media have for decades have loved to use the social safety net as a way to suggest American workers are lazy and slothful and things like that. And here's an interesting connection. Probably the number one reason some people aren't going back is lack of childcare. And there's a national shortage of childcare workers because they're drastically underpaid. And guess what's in Biden's Build Back Better bill that he's trying to get passed? A mountain of money to build up the childcare infrastructure in this country, because Biden's infrastructure was always about investment, human investment. And so Biden has a clear way to fix long-term this patchwork childcare conundrum that parents face all over the country. But again, so the pandemic has changed the way people view jobs, the way people view going back to what they think are crummy jobs and working for companies that they realize couldn't care less about them, and companies that became insanely profitable thanks to the remarkably efficient American worker. And so there's just been a rethinking about all of this. And Republicans in the press got it all wrong, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
More MIP after this message.
And as you mentioned, people are not going back to work for a myriad of reasons. Their story is right there.
Yeah.
You're right. A lot of it is childcare, but this thing has changed everybody. And
and just a real quick point. There was a statistic I found, between mid-June and mid-September, when all these people were supposed to go rushing back to work, the number of people who were caring for or people with COVID went up to like 2.5 million. And also, people are wondering where all the workers are. Well, 700,000 people just died of a pandemic. That's going to put a hole in the workforce, and the press doesn't really talk about that. So anyway, yeah, you're right. There are all kinds of reasons, and virtually none of the reasons were because of $300 checks the government were sending.
And here's another story. How many employers have changed? In other words, there are a lot of people who are never going physically back to work.
Right.
There are employers who have found that people can actually work virtually from now on. There are companies that are saving on rent and what have you. So, I mean, that's a story. That's an interesting story. Yeah. I know companies that have given workers option. They took a poll. Do you want to come back into a physical office space, or you contend working from home from now on? And then that also has an impact on childcare, because maybe that helps. But we want these stories like that because we like to enable insurrectionists. And I'll be honest with you, when you focus on the small minority of insurrectionists, it enables the crazy ones too. It doesn't discourage those who want to run up in the Capitol and wipe feces all over the Capitol. It lets people know, hey, I get some. This is acknowledged. This is a value. This matters. They're going to cover me doing this.
Well, and another quick point, and you see the Republican Party come to your aid. Remember 2 or 3 days after the insurrection, I mean, the New York Times had this big, there's a reckoning, the Republican reckoning with Trump. There's no way the Republican Party can stand for this kind of violence. They're going to this was news stories. They're going to finally have a reckoning and walk away from Trump. And now you've got, many Republicans basically saying the insurrection didn't happen. It was just a bunch of grandparents with homemade signs. And so, to your point, if you're an insurrectionist, not only do you see your activities normalized by the media, right, you're embraced by the Republican Party. So, what kind of signals are you getting there?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Of course, and I appreciate you. You always give us the perspective that others don't. Of course, Colin Powell lost last week, and it is hard. It is almost impossible to think of Colin Powell without thinking of the weapons of mass destruction, Iraq, and all of that in his testimony. And Colin Powell was very blessed because he did that and then managed later to admit and apologize for it, and he was accepted. I don't know how many people could have gotten away with that. I'm just being objective about it. I mean, but he was. It was hard even for someone like me, and I've told this story before. Years ago, when the draft Colin Powell committee was on my show, when I was doing live radio on terrestrial radio in Washington D.C., they came in my studio, and people who I knew and respected, Black Republicans, not like Black Republicans, some of the nut jobs, but anyway.
Right.
Well, I said, well, why is Colin Powell? And then I say for people like me for this reason, I said, well, why is Colin Powell a good person to run against Bill Clinton? This is in '95. And they said, well, Mark, he's not a black man like you are. And I knew what they meant, but I wanted them to explain it. I said, well, what do you mean by that? And they said, well, he's not militant like you. So I took him to task, Eric. I was like, well, he's not militant. I said, let me get this straight. He's in the military, a 4-star general, but I'm the one who's militant and he's not. So we kind of had a little back and forth on that. And then later that year, Colin Powell actually ended up endorsing our Million Man March. But the point is, Colin Powell was not like Herman Cain or Clarence Thomas. Yet it was very difficult to stomach. Many of us felt that Colin Powell should have resigned rather than give that speech at the UN. That would have been principle. But he did it his way, and he was heralded for speaking out later. That being the case, what Eric Boehlert has done, folks, this is why you should check out Press Run. Colin Powell may have given the speech, but he reminds us how the Washington Post and the New York Times, even beyond what Colin Powell did, went out of their way to trumpet WMDs and to enable that argument. And it was interesting, while they acknowledged his passing, and you could not write an obit of Colin Powell without acknowledging that he said that was wrong and he should not have done it and he disagreed with it, none of them did their own mea culpas. They didn't say, well, Colin Powell did it, God rest his soul. And you know what? We did the same thing. But we weren't big enough. We didn't do what he did. We didn't have come back later and say that we were wrong, did they?
Yeah. So this was the February 3rd infamous UN presentation that Powell gave, 2003, just weeks before the invasion. Public opinion was still, it's hard to recall, public opinion was still divided. Bush had done an awful job selling the war. Colin Powell in the summer of 2002 said, you have to go to the UN, you have to go to the UN. Bush said, okay, you go to the UN and sell it for me. Powell's sales job at the UN had been a disaster. France, to its credit, saw right through all of this stuff. So there was a UN Security Council, and Powell, live national television, 90 minutes, made his case. Turns out the intel he was using was all bogus. But my God, the press, particularly the Washington Post, basically carried him around on their shoulders for a week, saying, "This is it. We're going to war." The press wanted to go to war, and a lot of it also, it might be hard to remember. Remember the liberal hawks? That was a whole faction of otherwise liberal Democratic pundits, elite pundits in the Beltway, who decided for some bizarre reason that they were going to ditch their careers worth of perspective and say, "Oh yeah, we need to launch the first preemptive war in American history." So for Powell, Powell was the godsend. Powell was the one they said, "Aha!" They hid behind Powell. They said, "Well, if Colin Powell says it's true, it must be true." And just the Washington Post editorial the next day, the headline was irrefutable, and the argument was only unserious people at this point question whether Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. So Powell's presentation was incredibly influential, incredibly important, incredibly flawed. And, let's face it, led to hundreds of thousands of, not just him, but the whole invasion obviously cost us $3 trillion, I think, and hundreds of thousands of dead Iraqis. And honestly, the reason I highlighted it, because it really did, to me, it was the beginning of kind of the whole, the lies that the Trump administration used. The Bush administration used for the war. That was the beginning of mass misinformation, mass propaganda in this country that was embraced by the mainstream media. Instead of having a free press standing up and saying lie, 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 lie. New York Times, we've seen the reporting since. Howell Raines was the editor. He wanted the allegation from people in his newsroom. He wanted to use that war to show that the New York Times did not have a liberal media bias. So he let Judith Miller run wild and dream up wild front page stories about aluminum tubes and all these other things. But it was a massive failure by the media. And the key point you made is today, no self-reflection. It's, Colin Powell messed up, but we played no role in any of the invasion fiasco.
Yeah. And I guess it would mean even admitting that Colin Powell was better than us.
Yeah.
Because even though he messed up, he acknowledged it. We still won't do it. We still.
No, and real quick, Maureen Dowd over the weekend did a column about Colin Powell and kind of taking him to task and nailing him to the cross, and not one word about how the New York Times, who she works for, basically co-sponsored that war. So that was a perfect example of pundits kind of getting up on their soapbox today and tisking the Colin Powell without ever saying, "Oh, by the way, we did 10 times worse than what Colin Powell did."
Yeah, it's terrible.
Never having to say you're sorry.
Never having to say you're sorry, right? Folks, also, of course, Eric Boehlert has been reminding us of the unbalanced coverage when it comes to Joe Biden and CNN's obsession. CNN, he tweeted, follow him on Twitter as well, at Eric Boehlert. A CNN analysis of Biden's public schedule indicates that the president has spent a significant amount of time away from the White House, particularly on weekends since his January inauguration. And again, to this minority, this Washington Post, this is a headline. I remember when this was too small of a headline for the Washington Post. This was a topic too small. Biden's critics hurl increasingly vulgar taunts.
Right.
That's a headline. Like, people don't speak in vulgarities 24 hours a day, but that's a headline at the venerable Washington Post. They continue, and they never, again, this didn't really happen with Trump. It really was never a headline. Crazy president is vulgar every day. But they've got to create something negative, something controversial. They've got to overcompensate so that, as you said, don't look like liberal media, where liberal now has been defined by the right to mean just being objective, telling the truth.
Oh yeah, the press is very anxious to say to Republicans, "Oh, okay, well, you thought we were tough on Trump. Now watch this." I mean, we're going to be tough on Biden. We're going to do everything we did to Trump. Look, I have no problem with fact checking Joe Biden and things like that. But CNN, had the Biden town hall last week. And so they do this obligatory fact checking Joe Biden, because obviously every other sentence Trump said was a blatant lie. And the CNN, to its credit, did a very good job calling it out, even though they wouldn't call it lies, they called it falsehoods. But anyway, so Biden does this 90-minute town hall, and CNN is just absolutely scraping the bottom of the barrel because Joe Biden is essentially a truthful person, and he doesn't purposely lie, and he's not going on, having a town hall to spread propaganda. So one of their gotchas was Biden talked about the high end tax rate. He said it was 35%, and CNN said no, it's 37%. And it's just like, okay, that's fine. Like, yeah, I guess he got it wrong, but my God, considering what we just went through. But again, so it's a way for the Beltway press to say, well, this is how he treated Trump, so this is how we're going to treat Biden. Oh, Trump went golfing, got, I don't know, 850 times and cost the Secret Service $900 million. I don't know, I'm exaggerating. Oh, so Joe Biden goes to Delaware on the weekends to ride his bike. So, we're gonna do an analysis, and we're gonna present this as important news. Even though Biden when he was in Delaware over the weekend, he had Joe Manchin there because he was trying to hammer out, a spending bill. So, I think the press feels guilty in a way, the way they treated Trump. So they want to make sure, they give Biden the same treatment, even though Biden is a mainstream politician who's, I said, essentially honest, and Trump was a madman.
They feel guilty about the way they treated Trump. Unbelievable. That's pretty scary.
Yeah, I know, right?
That's pretty scary. By the way, before we go, just one thing I want to mention. You mentioned the social safety net. We were in West Virginia this weekend, and Manchin enables a lot of it too. He's running around using this term entitlements when it comes to Build Back Better. And let me just let you all know something. What people do when they do that, a lot of that is coded language. When you say stuff like entitlements, it implies that it's meant for a certain segment of the community, be they lazy or be they black. Or people of color. Let's be honest about it. Yep. Man, we get to West Virginia, and people have run the numbers. Everybody the vast majority of people that would benefit in West Virginia from what Build Back Better has to offer, while Manchin is calling entitlements, are white working class people in West Virginia. Yeah. Nobody else. But again, folks, that's what propaganda does. When you say social safety net and entitlements and that type of thing, people don't think it really benefits themselves. And that's where the media is important, because when it doesn't report on that. Now, this is a report that was done by the Poor People's Campaign. You've not seen that. That's a story. Hello? That's not a story. No, we got headlines like they're vulgar insults against Biden. Not that this is what Build Back Better would do in Joe Manchin's own constituency.
Well, yeah, I did a piece a week or two ago. There was a CBS poll, and only 10% of the country feels like it really knows what's in the Build Back Better bill. And this is a piece of legislation that's been in the news for 6 months.
Right. And
all you ever hear is 3.5 trillion. This is how much it's going to cost. This is why Republicans don't like it. This is why he can't get a single vote. Yeah. What's actually in the bill is a pretty well kept secret. In the last week or so, I think the press has done a little better job. I think they heard the criticism. I'll be perfectly honest. When I wrote my story, I really dove in and looked at what's in this bill. It's mind-boggling. It's basically the New Deal Part 2. Community college, paid leave, childcare infrastructure. It's amazing. It's amazing. And that's why, on the flip side, when pollsters ask Americans, a la carte, what do you think of this? Oh, everyone loves it. Everyone loves it. Everyone loves all of these things. Bipartisan support. But people don't know what's in the bill because the press has treated it as a process story, as a jockeying story. Right, Where's Manchin on this? Where's Semina on this? Why can't Biden get a deal passed? It's been a colossal failure. The press is one of its key roles is supposed to simply explain what legislation is. It ought to be able to cover the Capitol Hill legislative process and be able to tell people, how these things might change your life. But yeah, most people have no idea what's in it. And just a real quick, I think, I don't think it's an exaggeration. There's all this talk about the debt limit. Oh, I'm sure there are lots of fairly thoughtful news consumers who think the debt limit is going to expire because Biden wants to pass a $3.3 $5 trillion bill. And so there's a connection, not knowing that it's 3.5 over 10 years and that it's an investment and things like that. So again, I think the press has just done a poor job explaining, and they're much more into the jockeying and the the horse race aspect of all of this.
The default story, default headline, default coverage, the investigative coverage, in fact, is dams in disarray.
Yeah, of course.
Not what is in a bill, not the facts, just the facts. Oh, but that would make us look liberal.
Yeah.
Well, but this is what's in the bill. Whether it passes or not, you're right. You have a duty to inform the public what's in the bill, and this is an utter refusal to do that. On Twitter as well, Eric has resurrected his story about Mark Zuckerberg from a year and a half ago. You all want to go back and click on that and read that. All of that is coming true. He told us about that. Eric tells us about everything. You don't want to miss Press Run. Follow, like it, share it, retweet it. Eric Boehlert on Twitter. So you can actually, not only does he give us commentary, but I think Eric gives us some of the necessary tools to read this. If there was ever a moment when a cliche is appropriate, the tools to read between the lines, that is so necessary in this day and time, whether it's on Facebook or whether it's in this mainstream media. We have got to read between the lines, folks, or else we will continue to be fooled. Thanks as always, buddy.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Have a great week.
Okay, you too.
Thanks for getting woke and listening to Make It Plain. Please remember to listen, like, and wherever you get your podcasts, please give the show a 5-star rating. And please do spread the word. Let's all continue to pray for each other during this pandemic and this police-demic. If all hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.